Right. Okay. I want to make some concluding comments on the theme we have been discussing, namely the context of theory and theorizing. And then I will move on to the next set of considerations in our course, which is called as Section 2 of the syllabus, the interpretive dimension of the social sciences revisited. Right. But before I move into that theme, let me make some closing observations in accordance with the final PPT that has been shared with you, the final page of the PPT 3, right, which has been shared with you. And what I do in this final set of comments is actually move back to that distinction between the context of discovery and context of justification. And I think we have looked at the context in which the distinction arose, the uses to which the distinction has been put, the attempt by Swedberg to reaffirm the need to move away or to give equal emphasis on the context of discovery as also on the context of justification, etc., and that there is an overemphasis on the context of justification, which kind of curtails the ability to be able to capture and make the process of theorizing a lot more creative, and so on. Right. I've also made some observations about the absoluteness of that distinction, and I made some passing comments about why the distinction is untenable before I moved into this alternative context in which to think about theory and theorizing by setting up the traditional scientific conception of theory and theorizing, and then looked at responses to two sets of responses to it, and so on. So this is the trajectory that we have mapped till now. But let me I think revisit that classification between context of discovery and context of justification, etc. Now, so as I have been stressing, the division of context between discovery and justification, can be heuristically useful, has some interesting possibilities, but it should not be absolutized, right, etc. Okay, and somewhere along the way, it's important to recognize, that the distinction between context of discovery and context of justification can never be an absolute one, right? In fact, I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of ambiguities in that distinction, and I mean, for instance, whenever we use the term discovery, right, the common usage of discovery includes aspects of justification, and that discovery, what is called the context of discovery, is not exclusively an empirical or factual matter. It can also include logical aspects, while the context of justification can also include empirical, sociological, and psychological aspects, and so on, right? And I mean, I've stressed this, that questions raised at the level of the context of discovery, and to construct the context of discovery as purely a factual matter, and seeing the context of justification as a logical and normative matter, again, is too problematic. I mean, seems to imply that the factual and the normative don't reinforce each other. The question of the factual and the normative, I think we will be engaging more fully in the context of Weber and the evaluative basis of social science inquiry later in segment 2 of our course, right? So I think while recognizing that the context of discovery and context of justification, the distinction is useful, analytically useful. Overdoing the distinction or absolutizing it can be clearly problematic, right? In fact, let me push this argument a little further. In fact, a lot of scholars have argued that focusing exclusively on the context of justification neglects, right, the processes. Scholars call it selection processes, or some other scholars call it heuristic biases, right? That can occur in the context of discovery, because and that these heuristic biases that orient the investigation in a particular kind of a way can have implications for the ways in which we theorize the world and so on, right? So it has been argued that that overemphasizing the context of justification neglects the role of certain criteria in instituting objects of inquiry and so on. For instance, feminist philosophers of science have, for instance, highlighted such heuristic biases as androcentrism, or sexism, gender ideology. Androcentrism, seeing focusing on the masculine space and constructing the world from an androcentric perspective, means from a male perspective, etc. Such biases, according to philosophers of science, feminist philosophers of science, have governed scientific inquiries, and that consequently we need an alternative heuristics away from these kinds of biases. What some feminist scholars call standpoint theory, which will put different things in perspective, right? And that in looking at standpoint theory, you are, in a manner of speaking, taking the context of discovery seriously. I will have more to say about the standpoint theory in section 3 of our course, and I will postpone observations on standpoint theory for the moment, right? So clearly, scholars are arguing that we need to move away from an exclusive focus on the context of justification or the logic of justification, and also address equally the context of discovery, right? I think it's important to sometimes in addressing one excess, namely exclusive focus on the context of justification, one may lapse into another excess, an exclusive focus on the context of discovery, right? But I think what I'm going to say now has this possibility built into it, that in emphasizing against the context of justification, people may overemphasize the context of discovery. And I think it's important not to exclusivize either the context of justification or the context of discovery. So let me, in fact, I've already said about an exclusive focus on the context of justification and the problems attendant on it. Let me speak something about an exclusive focus on the context of discovery can also be problematic, in the sense that what the context of justification brings into perspective, right, or brings into play are certain normative criteria, right, which a purely descriptive analysis at the level of the context of discovery may not reveal, right? So if you have to understand about the norms and the normative criteria that govern inquiry, then it's important that you also take the context of justification seriously, so that an exclusive focus on the context of discovery can also be problematic in that it can see inquiry purely as a descriptive matter, ignoring the kind of prescriptive criteria or normative criteria about how ideas and hypotheses are generated, right? Which the context of justification speaks about, can get ignored. Okay. Now, in fact, in other words, what I'm placing in perspective, and I think this is a question to which we will return later in the course, is a tension between description and prescription, right? Evaluation, right? In any theory or epistemology, right? So how do we think about the basic relationship between discovery of facts and judgments about those facts, right? The evaluation of those facts. So how do we balance between the demands of description and the demands of evaluation, right? Etc. Okay, and I think this is a serious issue because it impinges on the question of the relationship between facts and values, and the how to think the relationship between domains of facts and domains of values. I mean, are values necessary for the construction of facts, right? How do values impinge on the construction of facts? How do facts ride independently and serve as a basis for certain pronouncements about values, etc., are important questions. In fact, later in the course, when I get into the evaluative basis of social scientific inquiry, I will actually take you through Weber's exercise of trying to think about objectivity in social science research, and his arguments for a value-free social science, right? And I will look at the plausibility of the idea of a value-free social science, and then argue for alternative understandings of the relationship between facts and values and so on. So I think what these closing considerations places in perspective, right, or this attempt to bring or balance demands of the context of discovery and the context of justification together, right, places in perspective the tensions between description, right, and prescription in any theory of or epistemology, right? In fact, you only have to read the Longino article which has been circulated, which will which I think will kind of epitomize the ground of these questions and so on, right? But I will return to this ground later in the course, etc. But please remember, for the moment, I think it's important to point out that even as we recognize the tension between description and prescription, or description and evaluation, it's important to recognize that separating descriptions from evaluations is never easy, right? In fact, it's a very tricky affair to disaggregate descriptions and evaluations, right? And many times, a certain evaluative thrust underlies a description, just as a description can also, try to stay free from being too deeply evaluative in its exercise and so on. So how to separate descriptions from evaluations, right, is an extremely tricky matter, because many of the concepts that we use to describe, okay, can actually be thick concepts, right? I mean, thick in the sense that the concepts is not only descriptive of a state of affairs, it is also evaluative of a state of affairs, right, etc. Now, for instance, a lot of our moral concepts of I mean, when you say something is beautiful, right? I mean, beautiful can measure as description, but there is also an underlying positive orientation given to being beautiful, or that act. And when you say that was a courageous act, that person is a coward, right? It is the coward is a description. X is a gentleman, right? Y is an enemy, right? These are descriptive words, yes, but they also carry a certain evaluative load, right? Etc. And somewhere that's why, I mean, to the extent that descriptions use concepts, many concepts which have this both evaluative and descriptive bent, they are what scholars will call thick concepts, right? Etc. It becomes quite problematic, right? In fact, there is a conceptual link, and we will see this later, between description and evaluation, which has a bearing on both the act of description and the act of evaluation, right? So the relationship between a description and an evaluation can be an intricate one. Separating cannot be easy. Okay, and somewhere along the way, this link between description and evaluation can have a bearing on the ways in which we think through both the act of description and the act of evaluation, right? I mean, think about, for instance, Clifford Geertz's arguments for thick description, right? And the kind of examples that his for instance, his description of a Balinese cockfight, right? He gives a thick description of a Balinese cockfight, but then you will find that the description also straddles the space of a certain modality of political assessment, evaluation, and so on, right? So there is, I think in the context of these issues, there is also a larger question of the politicization of the social sciences or of social scientific inquiry, as indeed of sciences, that has to be addressed, and so on. And I think we will be touching on these questions, in segment 2 of our course, in the last theme, on the evaluative basis of social science, and so on. But I think I needed to sound you out that the distinction, the analytical distinction between context of discovery and context of justification, and the need to balance and not exclusivize either or of these, and balance between them, impinges on this larger question of the tension between description and prescription in a theory or epistemology, and so on, right? And in the tradition, both in the sociological tradition and in the theoretical tradition, by and large, you will find different postulations of how to regulate this link and this tension between description and prescription. And I'll come to that, this ground of questions more fully as the course begins to progress. Are there any questions at this point? Because I with this, I have finished section 1 of our revised course outlines. I've sent across these 3 PPTs to you, PPT 1, 2, and 3, which covers section 1. Now I move to section 2, which covers PPT 4, 5, and 6, which I will address in due course. Okay, Raunak has a question. Yes, Raunak.
Sir, it's actually not a question. I'm just trying to think aloud. I might be terribly wrong and sound foolish, but
no problem.
Sir, when we are actually describing something, when we are using descriptive method, we are describing something. For example, if I say the leaf is green, aren't we at the same time evaluating as well. Doesn't description and evaluation usually fall into the same, domain? Like, aren't they the same usually? When we describe something, we also evaluate something at the same time as well.
Yeah, no, because no, I think theoretically, there is a possibility of keeping a description separate from an evaluation. Theoretically, it is possible to keep a description separate from an evaluation. Now, for instance, I'm reporting a certain state of affairs, right? Imagine I'm reporting a certain state of affairs, right? Okay. Now, for instance, the example that you gave, this is a leaf, right? Now, it is a pure description, but is that sufficient? Right? Somebody can ask this question. I mean, that if we remain with just a description, then the accounting process, which a description is part of, becomes uninteresting, right? Etc. So it's only when you thicken a description, you add certain components to the description, that it begins to acquire a certain kind of a evaluative tone. And that's when the description also begins to appeal to different segments of people differently, right? But theoretically, it is possible to keep a description separate from an evaluation. Theoretically possible, but whether that theoretical possibility translates into something analytically acute in terms of a sharper understanding of phenomena, that's a separate question, right? I think this is a question we'll come back to a little later in the course, but I think it's important, even with, for instance, a category like modernity, right? Etc. And there is a way in which you can be descriptive about modernity, right? Although the description by itself, even with a category like modernity, can be uninteresting if you do not incorporate some thicker elements into the description, right? So it is evaluation, or a certain underlying evaluation, that makes a description that much more interesting or challenging, right? But theoretically, it is possible to describe a certain state of affairs without letting any, loaded concepts to interfere or modulate the description, right? Etc. And I think it's important to yield theoretically that possibility. Although in actual practical terms, you will find that many times what enables a description is an underlying evaluation, or the weight of evaluative concepts that come to be inform it, and so on. Does this? I'm only adding to the observation that you have made, Raunak.
Yeah, yes, sir. Understood, sir. So
right.
basically, when it's thicken the description, then it usually moves towards a more evaluative aspect of it.
Sorry.
When we usually thicken the description, then it moves towards a more evaluative aspect of it.
No. I think the problem comes up when you place evaluation on a sleeve, right? I mean, for instance, in fact, I will be raising some questions. For instance, standpoint theory, right? Okay. How do we think about standpoint theory, right? Of course, standpoint theory is making a very simple point that every perspective on the world is from somewhere. It's from it. There is no neutral position from which you speak. So every voice, every observation is an articulation from some location, right? But standpoint theory is not just saying that. Standpoint theory is saying something more, and I don't want to disclose that something more, because I will be engaging philosophically with standpoint theory, etc. So there is. It's one thing to speak about perspectives, multiple perspectives on the world. It's quite another to say that only among the multiple perspectives, some perspectives yield better grasp of the world than others, right? And clearly, there is something strongly evaluative in a position such as standpoint theory. It is evaluative in saying that there is no way by which you can think of a view of the world from nowhere. Every view of the world is from somewhere, but some views of the world disclose the world better, right? Etc. In fact, I will give a name to that thesis later in the course, and evaluate these matters. But I think just as description can be uninteresting, pure description can be uninteresting, sometimes over evaluating, right? In fact, the philosopher whom I admire quite immensely, Bernard Williams, called it one thought too many, right? I mean, once you nurse too many thoughts and graft too many thoughts of a problem, right? One thought too many, right? Then somewhere that is as problematic as under nursing your thoughts, right? So putting your evaluation on your sleeve, right? Etc. I mean, there are certain contexts in which placing your evaluative position explicit about it is useful, okay, and necessary. But it's neither useful nor necessary in every given context in which you begin to evaluate. So just as description can be uninteresting unless it incorporates an evaluative dimension, evaluation can also be overreaching itself if it does not incorporate adequate descriptive elements, right? And once evaluation brings in adequate descriptive elements, it will have to reconstitute itself. Evaluation itself will have to reconstitute itself, and so on. That's what makes this exercise of trying to fuse context of discovery and context of justification, fuse epistemology and ontology, fuse theory and method, that much more demanding and critically challenging. Yeah. Anybody else? Any further supplementary, Raunak?
No, sir. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So that's so. Any other observations and comments and so on? Okay. Then so now I think we'll have to now kind of make a switch. I move into segment 2 of the course, the interpretive dimension of the social sciences revisited. And there are 3 themes that we'll be discussing under that rubric. 1, the concept of understanding and contextualized self-interpretations, epistemological and methodological aspects, questions of reasons and causes. The second theme in that second theme in this second section, reasons and causes and the idea of mechanisms. And third, the evaluative, rethinking the evaluative basis of social scientific inquiry. The PPTs relating to these 3 sub-themes have been already shared with you. The readings have also been shared with you. And I will now begin with PPT 4, right? Which is largely about the concept of understanding and contextualized self-interpretations, right? But I think there's some kind of a switch of arguments that this section introduces, but I think a lot of the issues that we have sounded out in section 1 get certain amplification in the context of segment the section 2, right? And you will see how certain kinds of ideas and perspectives that we have discussed alongside PPT 1, PPT 2, PPT 3 will find echoes in the context of PPT 3 PPT 4, PPT 5, and PPT 6. I'm now on PPT 4. Okay, and what I do in the first, and maybe I will take up Charles Taylor and contextualize self-interpretations in the next class, but I will try to contextualize some of the themes or contextualize the kind of concerns that operate in this section 2 of our syllabus outline, right? Please note that the section 2 overall is titled "The Interpretive Dimension of the Social Sciences Revisited." Now, what does it? I mean, what is the context in which the interpretive dimension gets emphasized, right? What is it to revisit the interpretive dimension, right? What is the background against which we begin to address the emphasis on the interpretive dimensions of the social sciences? I think are questions which I think one will have to give some background to. That's why in the slide soon after our key terms, in the first slide soon after the key terms page called Shifting Contexts and Backgrounds, I give you a sense of certain shifting concerns in the philosophy of social sciences, right? And I think it is, I want to locate some of the questions that this section 2 is handling, right, in the context of these shifting concerns in the philosophy of social sciences, right? So I will give you a kind of a sketchy background to the philosophy of social sciences. It's kind of selective and sketchy, very schematic, but nevertheless, I think it will contextualize some of the preoccupations that will dominate this segment of our course, especially that covered by PPT 4, 5, and 6, right, etc. Now, so let me set up the context for the kind of discussion and the preoccupation which will dominate our concerns in this segment of our course, right? Traditionally, I mean, two issues have dominated the philosophy of social sciences, and I'm saying this very broadly and schematically. There have been two issues that have dominated the philosophy of social sciences. Okay, one concerns about what is the object, the proper object, aim, and method of the social sciences, right? Okay, so I mean, since we're dealing with philosophical understandings of the social sciences, then the task is to come to terms with what are the object of the social sciences, the aim of the social sciences, the method of the social sciences. So one set of issues in traditional philosophy of social science is claims about the proper object, aim, and method of the social sciences. The second is critiquing, I mean, and this is again a preoccupation in traditional conceptions, in the traditional philosophy as practiced, traditional philosophy of social science, namely critiquing the conceptions of the social sciences modeled on the natural sciences, right? And in the critical literature, in the philosophy of social science as traditionally conceived, this is often represented as the critique of positivism, right, etc. Right. So the effort within the philosophy of social science, at least as traditionally conceived, is to define the method, object, aims of social scientific inquiry, and to critique social sciences modeled on the natural sciences. So in fact, as I say in the PPT, right, the debates around these two issues, okay, have centered around different kinds of questions, right? In fact, as I say it in the PPT, I isolate two sets of questions that the philosophy of social sciences has traditionally conceived, right, have preoccupied themselves with, which is consistent with the two issues that have dominated the philosophy of social sciences, right? One is the question of demarcation, right? I mean, how do we demarcate what? I mean, even as you specify what is the method, object, aims of social sciences, you're also trying to demarcate, okay, between the natural and the social sciences, right? And if this demarcation problem is settled, right, that social sciences are different from the natural sciences, okay, then what is the methodology to be adopted for the social sciences in the light of its distinctive objects, its and its aims, and so on. So the first issue which dominates traditional philosophy of social science yields questions about demarcation, right? In fact, this demarcation question also translates into the second issue, right? Namely, how do we critique social sciences modeled on the natural sciences, right? I mean, the critique of positivism and so on. I mean, if students want an exhaustive and a detailed account of the critique of positivism, right? I think there's a very long essay by Anthony Giddens in his book Studies in Social and Political Theory. I mean, it's not a book which is easily accessible, but but nevertheless, it's in that book, Studies in Social and Political Theory, he has a long chapter, Positivism and its Critics, right? And I think it's a useful chapter to read if one is, nursing these ambitions about which underscore the traditional philosophy of social science. The readings that I've shared with you also, I mean, if you read, I have given you only selected readings from the anthology, the Blackwell Guide to the Philosophy of Social Sciences. I've only given you selected readings, but if you this is accessible in book sites. If you access the whole book, you will get further readings on the critique of positivism and so on, right? Now, so the demarcation question, which a lot of traditional philosophy of social science revolved around, not just enables a proper understanding of the objects of social scientific inquiry, it also translates into a critique of conceptions of social science based on the natural sciences, right, etc. But I think equally interesting in the preoccupations that dominate the traditional philosophy of social science is not just the question of how you demarcate between natural sciences and social sciences. How do you see the social sciences apart from the natural sciences? Equally interesting is the question, as I put it, of rationality, right? And what is the proper criteria of rationality for describing and evaluating social phenomena, right? Especially when you're dealing with human action, right? Because rationality can operate on many registers, right? I mean, in fact, Weber, in his typology of action, spoke about different bases of action from what he called vert rational action, to zweck rational action, to traditional action, to value action, and so on, right, etc. Okay, so the key question is, what is the criteria of rationality on the basis of which you begin to describe and evaluate human action in particular, right, etc. Okay, now the criteria that you bring to evaluate human action, right, are these criteria fixed or variable? I mean, what is the action that you consider rational in one context may be considered non-rational or irrational in another context, right, etc. So is there some cultural some cultural conditioning that oversees these norms of rationality, right, etc. Okay, so are these criteria fixed or are they variable? Becomes an important question, right? Where do these criteria come from? I mean, where do our concepts of rationality come from, right? What is the place of emotion in our concepts of rationality, right? Right? Or what is the place of feeling in our concepts of rationality, right? Etc. Okay. I mean, where do our demarcation of something as rational and something as irrational or non-rational, where do they come from? The criteria come from, okay, how much these criteria are actually something that is designed in the context of investigation. Okay, for instance, we say these are criteria of scientific rationality, right, etc. Okay, that if you're doing a scientific inquiry, then somewhere along the way, there are only certain actions that you will consider as meeting with the criteria of rationality and so on. So there are standards by which you begin to assess conduct, which may come as part of paradigms of inquiry and so on, right? But then somebody can argue that rationality is not just a scientific category, right? Rationality is also a category of practice, right? It's not just a category of analysis, it's also a category of practice, right? That means a category of practice in the sense that people have, actors whom you study have their own conceptions of rationality, right, etc. So rationality, our criteria of rationality can come up both in the context of investigation, and it also can come up in the specific context of the social phenomena or social action under consideration, in that people may have their own understanding of how and why they act the way they do, and how they evaluate those actions, and so on. So you will find that traditional philosophy of social science did incorporate an extremely interesting range of questions about not just how do you set apart social sciences from the natural sciences, and the implications of modeling social sciences and on the natural sciences, and then the implications of setting it apart. Also on rationality, questions of relativism, how much our concepts of rationality come from the culture that we are studying, how much concepts of rationality can come from the standards of science that any analysis must adhere to, and so on, right, etc. And I mean, how do we think about human action, right? Are our criteria for defining actions as rational, irrational, non-rational, etc., fixed or variable? What is the place of feeling, of desire, of passion in our concepts of rationality, right, etc.? I mean, does rationality only imply instrumental action, right? Can rationality also imply expressive action, right? Non-instrumental actions, etc. I mean, there are a whole host of questions that come under this rubric of rationality. And I think a lot of traditional philosophy of social science actually also engaged with with a productive range of these questions. That's why when we see later, when we work our way through the hermeneutic conception of the social sciences as articulated by Charles Taylor, one of the ground of debate will be Charles Taylor's engagement with Peter Winch and Winch, who tries to incorporate some kind of an anthropological conception of rationality and so on, right? Of course, contemporary debates in the philosophy of social sciences have moved beyond these classical concerns. Whether it be of demarcation or of questions of rationality, right? Okay. Now, and in contemporary debates or in the philosophy of social sciences, there is a fuller recognition of the fact that these traditional questions that dominated the philosophy of social sciences, namely the question of demarcation and the question of rationality, may have to be recast in order to reincorporate a more robust understanding of the social sciences, including conceptions of science and rationality. And what these conceptions of science and rationality can do for our understanding of social inquiry and so on, right? In fact, one of the things that dominate contemporary discussions in the philosophy of social sciences, is not the older question of whether whether causal explanations, right, are possible or appropriate in the social sciences, or what is the place of interpretation in the social sciences? I mean, these were some of the traditional concerns. They are moved. I mean, the contemporary concerns have moved into questions of how to integrate explanatory and interpretative methodologies in the context of social scientific inquiry. And a lot of the concerns that which will dominate this section reflect these contemporary concerns, right, etc. So, in fact, that's why it's important to revisit the interpretive dimension of the social sciences. And I will, allude to some of the received wisdoms about the interpretative dimension of the social sciences and so on, right? I will not go into the history of these philosophical debates, but I will be concentrating on this methodology of interpretation and the binary that often gets to be instituted in the context of interpretation versus explanation, and especially causal explanations, and how I think somewhere the binary between cause and meaning, right? Interpretation focuses on meaning, cause is causal explanations, etc., will have to be rethought, and how, for instance, the concept of mechanisms yields a way by which you can move beyond the binary between cause and meaning, and so on. So that's why you have the second segment in this section, reasons and causes, and idea of mechanisms. And then I will, of course, move into further evaluative questions and so on, right? Many of the issues that we are going to discuss in section 2 across these 3 sub-themes will revolve around these contemporary concerns. And I think it's not as though I have not given you a hint of some of these contemporary concerns in the earlier lectures. Now, for instance, if the line between the natural sciences and the social sciences has to be drawn, can it be drawn in the older ways in which it was drawn, that interpretation is the sine qua non of the social sciences, whereas explanation is the sine qua non of the natural sciences. Surely that's a problematic drawing of lines. Can we think about redrawing the lines of distinction between the natural sciences and the social sciences? What are the questions that we need to bring in order to revitalize our concept of cause? Should we conceive a cause only in the traditional terms in which cause is looked at, or can we also bring newer tools of analysis to rethink the concept of cause as the concept of mechanisms brings in, right? Or alternatively, how do we sound the limits of interpretation, right, itself, and what are the key methodological and epistemological aspects that attach to the interpretative model of the social sciences, etc. I think the challenging questions of this kind, how do we think about the relationship between the descriptive ground and the prescriptive ground of inquiries, along the lines that I sounded out in the early part of this class, etc. These are the concerns which form the basis of this segment of our course. So I want to. That's why I want to. I want to situate the kind of concerns that dominate section 2 of our revised syllabus in the context of the shifting context and background that I have tried to set up for you, right? In my own work, of course, I've actually, kind of moved further with these questions, but I'm not going to, allude to some of my own writings on these questions. You can discover it yourself, etc. But basically, I think there is, I think it's important to revisit the ground on which the idea of interpretation is seen as the signature of the social sciences, and that in revisiting interpretation as the signature theme of the social sciences, what are the questions at the level of interpretation itself that we can be posing, and what are questions about social scientific inquiry outside of interpretation that we can be subsuming by opening up to a revitalized concept of cause, and so on. So how do we think about cause and meaning, right? How do we think about the intentional aspects of social life and the non-intentional aspects of social life, right? Etc. And to the extent that the intentional and the non-intentional aspects of social life kind of reinforce each other, how do we think the connections between cause and meaning, right? Because a lot of our concepts of cause are actually triggering understandings of the non-intentional dimension of social life. Do we think about meaning as cause? What are the implications of thinking meaning as cause, right? Do reasons for, meaning can be a reason for acting, etc. But do reasons constitute causes, right? Okay. How do we set apart reasons and causes, right? What is the place of meaning in this distinction between meaning, reasons, and causes, right? What is this idea of mechanisms that the course is talking about? What is this idea of reconciling description and evaluation, and that how do we rethink the tension between description and evaluation? I think these are issues which, in a sense, are in the forefront of the contemporary philosophy of social science. In fact, that's why I'm not going to give you a rehearsal of the philosophy of social science in which I grew up, right? And I think the philosophy of social science in which I grew up was preoccupied with these questions of demarcation and questions of rationality. Of course, these questions are important and they are still alive, but somewhere along the way, there is a ground that we need to traverse that will enable us to revisit these older concerns with some renewed energy and focus and so on. So that's why if you remember in my first class I said that when we were conceptualizing this, this course actually was first visualized as a course in the philosophy of social science, right? But then once one realized that the philosophy of social science is a very specialized discipline today, etc. And I think students can get overwhelmed with the specialized nature of the debate in the philosophy of social science. One was trying to reincorporate a certain old and the new, the older concerns and the newer concerns, and in the process, make the transition into newer questions in the philosophy of social science a little more easier for students. That's when this course began to get its bite, as it were, right? And in fact, I had spoken in my first lecture, which of course is not part of the recording, the first lecture in my class, where I actually said that when I was sitting with the designing of this course, at one point in time, I actually stopped thinking through this course and gave myself a long layoff, and then came back to these concerns with some renewed energy with this theory method fusion and so on. So I think it's important to see some of these larger concerns that I have given you an indication of at the level of the rationale of the course, and in the first segment of the course, beyond the hermeneutics of suspicion, will kind of guide the kind of critical remarks that we make in the context of revisiting the interpretive dimensions of social scientific inquiry. Right. So in the next class, I will actually move into hermeneutic understanding, the concept of understanding and contextualized self-interpretations, which can be broadly subsumed under one singular label, hermeneutic understanding. And my exercise of going through hermeneutics is not through the vibrant philosophical tradition that is hermeneutic inquiry, but a more contemporary social theorist, social and philosopher and theorist, Charles Taylor, an exemplary figure, and I will be traversing through some of his writings and taking you along through some of his writings, which have already been shared with you. Okay, are there any clarifications that you want to seek? Any doubts or clarifications? So I will start with the concept of understanding and contextualized self-interpretations more head-on in the next class, and I will be subsuming this theme, the concept of understanding and contextualized self-interpretation, under this broad label rubric called hermeneutic understanding, right? And I'll explain this in the next class, right? So if there are no questions, no clarifications, then I think I will switch off the recording. I've just set up the context for the themes that we are going to discuss in this segment of our course, and I think it's important to get a sense of the shifting context of the philosophy of social science itself in order to situate the kind of concerns that will operate in the kind of issues that we will be taking up for inquiry. I think, of course, in the light of this shifting context of philosophy of social science, I think these are part of the shifting context that I've tried to set up for you beyond the hermeneutics of suspicion and so on, right? Etc. So that's about it. Are there any? If there are no questions, then I'll kind of close the recording